Sometimes in life, the deepest wounds come from the person you trust the most. Imagine a woman who stands up only for her dignity and truth, and her own husband laughs at her and says, "You don't even have a lawyer. You can never beat me." But that husband has no idea that some people are watching quietly, and when they finally speak, the entire story changes. This is not just a court case story. This is a story of patience, courage, and a truth that may come late, but always comes out. If you enjoy real-life emotional and powerful stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Silent Queen Stories channel, because here we share stories that are not just told, they are felt. Sarah was a simple, educated woman with strong self-respect. She was married to Mark, who from the outside looked like a confident and successful businessman. In the early years everything was fine, but with time, Mark's behavior started to change. He began mocking her over small things, making fun of her decisions, and slowly making her feel that she was nothing without him. Sarah stayed quiet, because she always believed that saving relationships should come first. The real problem started when Mark sold their shared property without telling her. Soon after, court papers arrived in Sarah's hands. It was a divorce notice, along with a legal document stating that Sarah had no right to that property. Her hands started shaking. She tried to talk to Mark, but he just laughed. With a cold smile, he said, "What will you do? You don't have an expensive lawyer, no power. The court will be on my side." Those words hit Sarah's heart like arrows, not only because Mark was her husband, but because he turned her entire life and self-worth into a joke. At that moment, Sarah truly had no lawyer. She only had the truth, and a silent pain. That night, Sarah called her mother. Her voice was heavy, and words barely came out. Her mother only said one thing, "My child, truth is never alone." Sarah remembered her brother Daniel, who had left home years ago to join the military and was now a Navy SEAL. But Sarah never wanted to use his position. She always wanted to fight her own battles. The next day was the first court hearing. Sarah stood in the courtroom wearing simple clothes, without any legal team. On the other side, Mark sat confidently in an expensive suit, with his lawyer beside him. When the judge asked who Sarah's lawyer was, Mark smiled slightly. That smile was not just arrogance, it was certainty that he had already won. Sarah said softly, "I don't have one yet." A quiet murmur spread through the courtroom. Mark turned toward her and whispered, "I told you." At that exact moment, the courtroom doors opened. Everyone looked toward the entrance. A woman walked in with a straight posture, white hair, but a strong and unshakable confidence in her eyes. She was Sarah's mother. Beside her was a tall, fit man, whose walk showed discipline and authority. It was Daniel. The courtroom fell completely silent. The judge looked at them and asked, "Who are you?" Sarah's mother stepped forward and said, "I am her mother, and this is her brother, and we are standing with her in this case." Mark's face turned pale. For the first time, he looked closely at Daniel. He wasn't wearing his Navy SEAL uniform, but the intensity in his eyes was the kind only seen in people who have faced war. Daniel did not threaten anyone. He did not raise his voice. He only said, "We are not here to fight. We are here for the truth." That one sentence gave Sarah strength. For the first time, she did not feel alone. She realized that when a woman breaks her silence, it is not just her speaking. Her entire story speaks with her. The judge postponed the hearing and advised Sarah to arrange proper legal representation. As they walked out of the courtroom, Mark looked at Daniel with anger and shock, but Daniel gave no reaction. Just one look. That said, the story has only begun. And from that moment, a journey began that was not just a legal case, but a woman's fight to reclaim her identity, a fight for every woman who was ever considered weak only because she stayed silent. If you want to know what happened next and how the truth slowly shocked everyone, stay with us till the end of the video. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments, because your voice might become someone else's strength. After that first court day, Sarah's life changed quietly but deeply. The fear she had carried for weeks did not disappear, but it softened. For the first time, she felt supported, not rescued, but supported. Her mother stayed with her that night, sitting beside her on the couch, holding her hand the way she did when Sarah was a child. Daniel did not say much. He never did. But his presence alone felt like a wall between Sarah and everything that had tried to break her. The next morning, Daniel asked Sarah one simple question. "Did you sign anything without reading it carefully?" Sarah shook her head. She had always been careful, even when Mark made her feel small. That answer mattered. Daniel nodded slowly and said, "Then you still have your truth, and truth is enough." They contacted a lawyer that afternoon, not a flashy one, not someone who loved attention, but a woman with years of experience in family and property law. When Sarah told her the full story, the lawyer listened without interrupting. She didn't promise an easy win. She didn't give false hope. She only said, "If what you're saying is true, then he made mistakes. And mistakes leave evidence." Mark, on the other hand, was enjoying his confidence. He told his friends the case was already decided. He joked about Sarah being too emotional and too weak to fight him. He believed money and confidence were enough. What he didn't realize was that while he was mocking her, Sarah was quietly preparing. The next court date arrived faster than expected. This time Sarah walked into the courtroom differently. She was still wearing simple clothes, but her posture had changed. She was not looking down anymore. Her lawyer walked beside her, calm and focused. Her mother sat behind her, silent but alert. Daniel sat at the back, not trying to be seen but impossible to ignore. Mark noticed immediately. His smile faded when he saw Sarah wasn't alone anymore. His lawyer leaned over and whispered something to him. Mark's jaw tightened. The hearing began. Sarah's lawyer requested access to financial records related to the property sale. Mark's lawyer objected, calling it unnecessary. The judge looked at the documents briefly and then approved the request. It was a small moment, but it mattered. Sarah felt her heart beat faster. For the first time, the court wasn't just listening to Mark. As days passed, documents started coming in. Bank statements, transaction timelines, property records. The lawyer explained everything to Sarah slowly, making sure she understood. And that's when the truth began to form clearly. Mark had sold the property under a company name Sarah didn't recognize, a company that had been registered only months before the sale, a company linked directly to Mark. Sarah felt sick when she realized it, not because of the money but because of the betrayal. This wasn't a mistake. This was planned. At night, Sarah struggled to sleep. Her mind replayed years of moments she had ignored. Times Mark dismissed her questions. Times he controlled conversations. Times she chose peace over clarity. Her mother reminded her gently, "You trusted. That was not your weakness. That was your humanity." The next hearing was tense. Sarah's lawyer presented the findings calmly. She didn't accuse. She didn't dramatize. She simply laid out facts, dates, signatures, connections. Mark shifted in his seat. His confidence cracked for the first time. When the judge asked Mark to explain the company connection, he hesitated. Just for a second. But that second was loud. He tried to explain it away as business structure and standard practice. The judge listened carefully, expression unreadable. During a short recess, Mark walked past Sarah. He leaned close and whispered, "You think you're winning? This won't end well for you." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something surprising. She wasn't afraid anymore. She didn't respond. Silence was no longer her weakness. It was her control. Daniel watched from a distance. He didn't step in. He didn't interfere. He trusted Sarah to stand on her own, and that trust meant more than any protection ever could. As the case continued, witnesses were called. A real estate agent admitted Mark insisted on rushing the sale. A financial officer confirmed unusual transfers. Each detail added weight. Mark's lawyer grew quieter, his arguments shorter. Sarah testified too. Her voice shook at first, but she didn't stop. She spoke about the property, the marriage, the trust. She didn't insult Mark. She didn't attack him. She simply told the truth as she lived it. The courtroom was silent. When she finished, the judge nodded slowly. That nod stayed with Sarah longer than any word could. Outside the courtroom, people started noticing her story, not because it was dramatic, but because it was familiar. Women messaged her quietly. Friends she hadn't spoken to in years reached out. They told her, "Your courage is giving me strength." If this story is making you think of someone you know or even yourself, take a moment to share this video and let us know in the comments what part of this journey touched you the most. Stories like this grow stronger when they are shared. Mark, however, was unraveling. His control was slipping, and it terrified him. For years he believed Sarah's silence meant weakness. He was wrong. Silence had only been her patience. The judge scheduled the final hearing. The decision would come soon, and Sarah knew something deep in her heart. Ow. No matter the outcome, she had already reclaimed something far more important than property or money. She had reclaimed her voice. What no one yet realized was that the final truth was still waiting to be revealed, and when it did, it would change everything Mark thought he knew. The days before the final hearing felt heavier than everything Sarah had experienced so far. Not because she was scared of losing, but because she was finally seeing the full picture of her marriage clearly. Every document, every testimony, every quiet realization was like another piece falling into place. And once the picture was complete, there was no unseeing it. Mark tried to regain control outside the courtroom. He sent messages late at night, shifting between anger and fake concern. One moment he accused Sarah of destroying his life, the next he reminded her of good times they once had. Sarah read those messages once, then stopped responding. Her lawyer advised her to keep everything documented, but emotionally, Sarah had already stepped away. Her mother noticed the change in her. Sarah spoke less, but when she did, her words were firm. There was no confusion in her eyes anymore, only clarity. Her mother said softly one evening, "This is what strength looks like. Quiet, but unbreakable." Daniel stayed in the background, exactly where Sarah needed him to be. He never spoke to Mark, never stared him down. His discipline showed in his restraint. To him, this wasn't about intimidation. It was about accountability. And accountability didn't require loud voices. The final hearing day arrived. The courtroom felt different this time. Tighter, heavier. Almost everyone present understood that this was no longer a simple divorce dispute. This was about deception. Mark arrived early, pacing near his lawyer. His confidence was gone, replaced by irritation and visible stress. When Sarah walked in, he looked at her, hoping for hesitation. He found none. The judge entered, and the room settled into silence. Sarah's lawyer spoke first. She summarized the evidence calmly, connecting every detail into a clear narrative. The secret company, the rushed sale, the financial transfers, the intentional exclusion of Sarah's consent. Nothing was exaggerated, nothing was emotional, just truth, laid out cleanly. Then Mark's lawyer stood. His argument sounded familiar but weaker now. He tried to frame everything as misunderstanding, poor communication, normal business decisions, but the words didn't land the way they used to. Too many facts were standing in the way. When Mark was asked to speak, he hesitated again, this time longer. He talked about pressure, about responsibility, about how Sarah never understood business. The judge listened, but something had shifted. Mark was no longer speaking from authority. He was defending himself. Sarah was asked one final question. The judge looked directly at her and said, "Did you ever give consent for the sale of the shared property?" Sarah answered clearly, "No, Your Honor. I was never informed." That was it. No long speech, no explanation, just a sentence. The courtroom went silent again. The judge closed the file and said the decision would be delivered shortly. Outside, Mark lost his composure. He accused Sarah of humiliating him, of turning people against him. For the first time, Sarah spoke back, not angrily, not emotionally. She said, "You did that yourself. I just stopped protecting you." Mark froze. That sentence hurt him more than any ruling ever could. That evening, Sarah sat alone in her room thinking about everything. She realized something important. For years she thought strength meant enduring, staying, compromising herself for peace. But real strength, she now understood, was knowing when to stop shrinking. Messages kept coming in. Women sharing their own stories, quiet confessions, silent struggles. Sarah didn't reply to all of them, but she read every one. and each message reminded her that this story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to many. This is why stories like this are shared on Silent Queen Stories. Because silence does not mean weakness. Sometimes it means survival. And sometimes it means waiting for the right moment to rise. The judge's decision day arrived. The courtroom was full. The air felt heavy again, but different, final. The judge spoke slowly, carefully. He acknowledged the evidence. He addressed the lack of consent. He stated clearly that the property sale was conducted unlawfully with intent to exclude rightful ownership. Sarah's heart pounded. Mark stared straight ahead, unmoving. The ruling was clear. The sale was declared invalid. The property rights were restored, and further financial investigation was ordered. Mark's shoulders dropped. He didn't argue. He didn't react. For the first time, there was nothing left to say. Sarah didn't cry. She didn't smile either. She simply closed her eyes for a moment. Not in relief, in release. As she walked out of the courtroom, her mother hugged her tightly. Daniel nodded once. That nod carried pride, respect, and something deeper. Trust. But what Sarah didn't yet know was that this ruling was only the beginning. Because once truth surfaces, it doesn't stop where you expect it to. And what would be revealed next would not only change Mark's future, it would expose a truth no one saw coming. After the court ruling, Mark tried to disappear from public view. He stopped answering calls, avoided mutual friends, and stayed away from places where people might recognize him. The investigation ordered by the judge had begun quietly, but its impact was already heavy. Financial records don't lie, and once they start speaking, they rarely stop. Sarah, on the other hand, felt something unfamiliar. Calm. Not happiness, not victory, just calm. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for the next argument, the next insult, or the next disappointment. She woke up without AR, and that alone felt like freedom. Her lawyer called one afternoon with new information. The company Mark had used to sell the property was connected to multiple irregular transactions. Funds were moved between accounts in ways that suggested intentional concealment. This was no longer just a family court matter. It was becoming something much bigger. Sarah felt a chill run through her. She never wanted revenge. She only wanted fairness. But she also understood that once truth begins to surface, it doesn't ask permission. Mark's lawyer withdrew from the case shortly after. No explanation was given publicly, but the message was clear. This situation was beyond repair. Mark hired a new legal team, more aggressive, more desperate. But aggression without truth is just noise. Daniel remained distant but observant. One evening, he finally spoke more than a few words. He said, "In my line of work, the most dangerous people aren't the loud ones. They're the ones who think they'll never be questioned." Sarah understood exactly what he meant. As news of the investigation spread quietly, Mark's image began to crack. Business partners asked questions. Deals were paused. Trust eroded. The same confidence that once protected him now worked against him. Sarah was called to give an additional statement. This time, it wasn't just about property. It was about timelines, patterns, and behavior. She answered honestly, without exaggeration. She didn't need to add drama. The facts were wrong enough. One question stayed with her long after the meeting ended. "Why didn't you question him earlier?" Sarah answered calmly, "Because I trusted my husband." There was no shame in her voice, and that honesty carried weight. At home, Sarah began rebuilding small parts of her life. She rearranged her space, removed objects that reminded her of silence and compromise. She took long walks. She started journaling, not to document pain, but to understand growth. Women continued reaching out. Some shared stories of control and manipulation. Others shared regret for staying silent too long. Sarah didn't position herself as a hero. She listened. Sometimes listening is the strongest form of support. This is why Silent Queen Stories exists, because many battles are fought quietly, long before anyone sees the outcome. Mark, meanwhile, felt the walls closing in. The investigation expanded. Authorities uncovered additional assets hidden under relatives' names. Every attempt to explain created more questions. He wasn't in control anymore, and that terrified him. One night, Mark showed up unannounced. Sarah's mother answered the door. Mark looked tired, smaller. Not angry this time, just defeated. He asked to speak to Sarah. Sarah stepped forward, calm and steady. Mark tried to apologize. The words came out broken and rushed. He said he never thought things would go this far. He said he felt trapped. He said he was sorry. Sarah listened quietly. When he finished, she said so. "Nothing simple. I didn't ask for this. I asked for honesty." Mark had no response. She closed the door gently, not out of anger, out of closure. The investigation moved faster after that. Legal consequences were now unavoidable. Mark's future was uncertain, and for the first time, it wasn't Sarah carrying that weight. Sarah sat with her mother later that night. Her mother said softly, "You didn't just stand up for yourself. You changed a pattern." Sarah understood. Sometimes breaking silence doesn't just change one life, it changes many. But the story wasn't finished yet, because one final revelation was still coming, a revelation that would answer the question no one had asked out loud. Why was Mark so desperate to hide everything? And when that truth came out, it would shock everyone. The answer to why Mark had been hiding everything came slowly, piece by piece, the way truth often does. Investigators discovered that the property sale was not an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern. Mark had been moving money for years, shifting assets between shell companies, masking losses, and presenting a version of success that wasn't real. The pressure began to expose cracks he could no longer cover. Business partners withdrew quietly. Accounts were frozen. Questions multiplied faster than answers. The man who once laughed in court now avoided eye contact everywhere he went. Sarah was informed that the investigation had uncovered debts far larger than she ever imagined. The property he sold wasn't just about control, it was about survival. Mark was drowning financially, and instead of asking for help or telling the truth, he chose deception. When Sarah heard this, she didn't feel satisfaction. She felt clarity. Everything finally made sense. The control, the insults, the constant need to feel superior. It was never about her being weak. It was about him being afraid. One afternoon, Sarah met with the investigators again. They asked if she had noticed anything unusual during the marriage. She spoke honestly about Mark's secrecy, his late nights, his defensiveness around finances. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't speculate. She simply described her reality. That reality mattered. Mark was formally charged with financial fraud. News did not spread loudly at first, but it spread steadily. Those who once admired him stepped back. Those who ignored warning signs began to question themselves. Sarah's name, however, was cleared completely. The court recognized her as a victim of deception, not a participant. That distinction mattered more than any apology ever could. Daniel called her that evening. His voice was calm but proud. He said, "You stood your ground without becoming someone else." Sarah smiled quietly. That was the highest praise she could receive. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. Healing rarely works that way. But it became honest, and honesty is lighter to carry. Sarah moved into a new routine. She returned to things she once loved but had set aside. Reading in the mornings, cooking without rushing, sitting in silence without feeling judged. Peace became her new normal. The trial date for Mark's criminal case was set. Sarah was not required to attend, but she chose to. Not to watch him fall, but to close the chapter fully. In court, Mark looked different, thinner, quieter. When he saw Sarah, he looked away. For the first time, he understood what it meant to lose power completely. When asked if he had anything to say, Mark admitted guilt. Not with emotion, not with excuses, just admission. That moment ended everything he once pretended to be. Sarah felt no triumph, only release. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked questions. Sarah declined interviews. She didn't want attention, she wanted peace. But one question stayed with her. Why did you stay silent for so long? Sarah answered softly, because I was surviving. Now, I'm living. That answer resonated more than any headline. If this part of the story moved you, Take a moment to share this video with someone who might need it, and let us know in the comments if you've ever had a moment when truth finally brought clarity to your life. This is why stories like this matter on Silent Queen Stories. They remind us that silence is not weakness. It is often the space where strength is formed. But the journey wasn't over yet, because the final chapter wasn't about Mark at all. It was about who Sarah became after everything was taken away, and what she chose to build in its place. After everything settled, Sarah expected emptiness. Instead, she felt space to think, to breathe, to decide who she wanted to be without constantly adjusting herself for someone else's comfort. That realization didn't come all at once. It came in quiet moments. Mornings without tension, evenings without fear. She began therapy, not because she felt broken, but because she wanted to understand herself better. She wanted to recognize the patterns that kept her silent for so long, and make sure she never repeated them. Each session helped her reconnect with parts of herself she had slowly pushed aside. Her relationship with her mother deepened. They talked more openly now, not just about the past, but about boundaries, self-worth, and choices. Her mother said one day, "I stayed silent in my own marriage longer than I should have. I didn't want that for you." Sarah realized how many stories are passed quietly from one generation to the next. Daniel returned to his duties soon after the trial. Before leaving, he hugged Sarah and said something she would never forget. "You didn't need saving, you needed support." That sentence stayed with her. It reshaped how she viewed strength, not as rescue, but as respect. Sarah slowly rebuilt her confidence. She took a course she had once been discouraged from pursuing. She applied for a role she never thought she deserved. She learned to speak without apologizing for her presence. People around her noticed the change, not because she was louder, but because she was steadier. She didn't explain herself as much. She didn't shrink in conversations. She listened, and when she spoke, her words carried weight. One evening, Sarah attended a small community event. A woman approached her quietly and said, "I heard your story. It gave me courage to leave." Sarah didn't know what to say at first. She simply held the woman's hand. Sometimes presence is more powerful than advice. This is the heart of Silent Queen Stories. Stories that don't shout, but still change lives. Sarah started journaling again, this time not to process pain, but to document growth. She wrote about boundaries, about forgiveness without reconciliation, about loving without losing yourself. She forgave Mark, not for him, but for herself. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing. It meant releasing the weight of anger that no longer served her. That release felt like freedom. Time passed. Seasons changed. Sarah moved into a new home, a smaller one but one filled with light. She decorated it slowly, intentionally. Every object had meaning. Nothing felt temporary. On one quiet afternoon, Sarah received a message from Mark. It was brief. He said he hoped she was well. Sarah read it once, then archived it. She didn't respond. Closure doesn't always require conversation. Sarah reflected often on how close she had come to believing she was powerless, how easily that belief could have shaped her future, and how one moment of truth had changed everything. If you're still watching this story, it's likely because something here feels familiar. Maybe you've been silent too. Maybe you're waiting for the right moment. Let this be your reminder that your voice matters, even if it shakes. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that. And tell us in the comments what part of Sarah's journey felt closest to your own. The final part of this story isn't about what was lost. It's about what was built, and it's the most powerful part of all. By the time a full year had passed, Sarah barely recognized the woman she used to be, not because she had become someone new, but because she had finally returned to who she was before fear taught her to be small. Growth didn't feel dramatic anymore. It felt natural. She no longer replayed conversations in her head. She no longer questioned whether her feelings were too moo. She trusted herself. That trust became the foundation of everything else. Sarah began mentoring quietly, not formally, not publicly, but through simple conversations. Women reached out, sometimes just to listen, sometimes just to know they weren't alone. Sarah never told anyone what to do. She shared her experience, honestly and without shame, and that honesty gave others permission to be honest too. One evening, while watching the sunset from her porch, Sarah thought about the moment Mark mocked her in court, how small and powerless she had felt, and how that moment, meant to break her, had instead become the turning point of her life. She realized something important. People who mock your silence are often afraid of what will happen when you finally speak. Her mother visited often now. They laughed more than they cried. The heaviness that once sat between them was gone. In its place was understanding. Healing didn't erase the past, but it softened it. Daniel sent messages from time to time, short ones, simple ones, proud of you. Those words carried more meaning than long conversations ever could. Sarah's work life flourished. She took leadership roles she once avoided. She set boundaries without guilt. She walked away from situations that didn't respect her time or values. Peace became non-negotiable. One afternoon, Sarah was invited to speak at a small gathering. She almost said no. Old habits die slowly. But she remembered the woman who once stood in court, without a lawyer, and found her voice anyway. She accepted. She didn't tell her full story. She didn't need to. She spoke about self-trust, about listening to discomfort, about courage that doesn't announce itself. The room was quiet. People were listening. Afterward, a man approached her and said, "I used to think silence meant weakness." Sarah smiled gently and said, "Sometimes it means survival." That moment stayed with her. Stories like this don't always end with applause or public recognition. Sometimes they end with something quieter: stability, confidence, self-respect. And those endings last longer. If this story has stayed with you this far, take a moment to reflect on your own journey. And if it resonates, share it with someone who might need a reminder that strength doesn't always look loud. We share stories like this on Silent Queen Stories because so many lives are changed in silence. The final chapter is not about closure, it's about legacy, what Sarah left behind, and what she carried forward. Years later, when Sarah looked back at everything she had lived through, the memories no longer hurt. They taught. Pain had turned into wisdom, and silence had turned into strength. She understood now that some chapters exist only to shape us, not to define us. Sarah never introduced herself as a survivor. She didn't need a label. Her life spoke for itself. The way she walked into rooms without shrinking. The way she listened without losing herself. The way she chose peace without guilt. She built a life rooted in honesty, not perfection but truth. Her home was filled with light, laughter, and calm. She surrounded herself with people who respected her boundaries and valued her voice. Occasionally she heard updates about Mark. His life moved in a different direction. Consequences followed choices, as they always do. Sarah felt no bitterness, only distance. And distance can be a form of peace. Her relationship with her mother became one of friendship as much as family. They spoke openly about lessons learned, about generations of women taught to stay quiet. Together, they broke that cycle. Daniel eventually retired from service. At a family gathering, he raised a glass and said, "To strength that doesn't need permission." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of gratitude. Sarah continued mentoring quietly. She never sought recognition. She understood that not all impact is visible. Sometimes the greatest change happens in private moments, through simple words, shared experiences, and quiet courage. This is why Silent Queen Stories exists, to remind us that silence is not the absence of power. It is often where power is born. Sarah knew one thing for certain now. She would never again confuse love with control or peace with silence. She taught that lesson not just to herself, but to everyone who crossed her path. One evening, while journaling, Sarah wrote a sentence that summed up her journey. "I did not rise by becoming louder. I rose by becoming truer." If you've watched this story till the end, thank you for staying. Stories like this only matter when they are shared. If this journey touched your heart, leave a comment and tell us. What part resonated with you the most? And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, share it with them. You never know whose silence you might help break. Subscribe to Silent Queen Stories for more real, powerful journeys of quiet strength and truth. Because sometimes the strongest voices are the ones that rise from silence.